PSVR2 has been out for over 6 months now, and the launch lineup was honestly pretty decent. And since then, contrary to what a lot of other people think, I think the PSVR2 has had a steady release of some pretty good games and also some pretty not so great games. Now, when I bought my PSVR2, I was fully prepared for this to be a machine that, I play once every 2 weeks for a while until a couple of big games come out. And that's exactly how I've been using my PSVR2. Now, luckily there have been a couple of games that I've been dipping in and out of, playing once a week maybe. But some of the bigger games that I was really excited for kind of fell flat. And I think you know what games I'm talking about. So we'll have to start one of the biggest new VR games this year, and that is Synapse. A telekinetic roguelike shooter that understands what a great 10-second loop is. You spawn into a level, shoot enemies, and move things with your mind. Yeah, this feels like you're Darth Vader, and that 10-second loop is so satisfying. So you can lift blocks, enemies, and barrels. And with blocks, you can bash them off enemies to damage them. For barrels, you can do a soft press of the bumper to hold them, and then a full press to blow them up. And the enemies, well, you can do whatever you want with them. Bash them off the ground, fling them into the air, or throw them into lava. The first time I flung an enemy into the air and shot them mid-air to kill them, I was like, oh my god, this game is going to be so fun. But the thing that lets it down is that it lacks a lot of variety. Being a roguelike, there are a few things I've come to expect. Random weapons, upgrades, enemies, bosses, and random levels. And as a narrative kinetic shooter, Synapse is amazing. But as a roguelike, it fails quite a bit due to the lack of diversity in the gameplay. After like 2 runs, I had seen all the enemies and levels, so there was nothing new after that for me in that regard. And as you go through, you beat challenges that unlock skill points that you use to upgrade your character, so this added some replayability and variety by giving me new powers like being able to throw grenades back at enemies or spawn new weapons. But there are only 4 weapons and not that many upgrades, so quickly each run feels the same. After a few hours, I was running through the same levels, fighting the same enemies, using the same weapons, and while nothing can be taken away from the moment-to-moment gameplay, if this game had really deep roguelike mechanics behind it, I would be playing this game non-stop. Even at that, there are no bosses or secrets to find, which is a shame. On my first run, I ran into a boss, or what I thought was a boss, but it turns out it was just a harder enemy that appeared loads later in the game. And I can't really think of any other roguelike game that takes this approach. I think there should be a boss at the end of the levels, maybe not every level, but at least at points during the run to mix it up a bit. To complete the story, you have to beat the game 3 times, and each time you unlock a harder difficulty, and I was hoping I would see new enemies as the difficulty ramped up, but instead I just got a more powerful version of the enemies I'd already fought. I've played 5 hours of it, and I'm at 92% completion of the trophies, so realistically there's probably about 8 to 10 hours in this game unless you want to chase high scores, but that just isn't compelling enough for me. It's very fun, stupidly fun, and if this was, say, a narrative VR shooter, I think it would be a completely different story, because a 5-hour kind of deep narrative VR shooter with these mechanics would be great. But the fact that it's a roguelike, I was kind of expecting a bit more replayability, which is one of the best things about roguelike games, but it just doesn't have it. If you want a VR roguelike shooter, then check out my other video where I talk about the Light Brigade. Because the Light Brigade, yes, it feels a lot more janky, but it does have better roguelike mechanics. Honestly, if Synapse had the roguelike mechanics of the Light Brigade but had the shooting mechanics of Synapse, this would be a completely different story. This would be probably one of my favourite games of the year, but it just doesn't reach that. Next is Walkabout Mini Golf VR, and this game is pretty much perfect. There's not much to say about it mechanically. It's mini golf. You have a putter and you smack the ball into the hole. But I love golf, and I also love mini golf, and this is a perfect game to relax to. Pop in a podcast or chat with a friend while playing. First of all, as someone who plays golf in real life, this feels quite authentic. I mean, as authentic as mini golf can feel. So the physics are pretty much on point. And on top of that, the base game has so many courses, and they're just constantly releasing DLC and just giving you so many more courses to just run around and play some mini golf. Each course has a day and nighttime variant, with the nighttime place being a more complex version of the course. But they're just so cool. You have typical courses like Pirates Cove kind of place, but then there are desert canyons and a Japanese Zen garden. And then when you get into the DLC, it gets even crazier, like the Lost City of Atlantis or Shangri-La. And I've heard from many people who have this game on other platforms like Oculus, literally have put hundreds, if not thousands of hours into this game, because it's just so replayable. It's a great game to just sit down and just relax. I don't play it that often, like maybe once a week, if even, maybe once every 2 weeks. But it's just great if you're just want to relax, pop on your VR headset, listen to a podcast and just chill. Or as a multiplayer game, this game is fantastic. I've played this with my friend David a good couple of times. And as I said, it's just so relaxing. And in real life, one of the best things about golf is that you just get to have a chat with your friend. And this perfectly replicates that, but in VR. You know, if your friend lives miles away from you or something, you can just play some mini golf and just have a chat. And for that sort of a game, I seriously cannot think of a more perfect game to play with your friends. 100% recommendation. It's one of the best VR games I've ever played. Next is a game I love, but I'm afraid that the player base will die, and that is Knock. Imagine VR Rocket League, but instead of cars, you're a human running around an arena shooting arrows at the ball to score. It's just as frantic as Rocket League, if not more. And you use your hands basically as ski poles to ski around the map. All the while having to keep an eye on the ball and shoot arrows to either hit the ball forward or to block it. The reason I'm afraid though is that this game only released on PSVR2 not so long ago, and already the player count is kind of dwindling. It has crossplay, which is great, but already it's very difficult to keep an online game community going, and it's going to be made even more difficult with a smaller install base on VR consoles. I didn't go too deep with this game, and I was just dipping in and out for like a week or two, just playing a game here or there, but I was struggling to find games when I was playing at off-peak times, and for me personally, that's a massive issue in VR, because I generally don't like to play VR at night time. It's just, I don't know, it's just too much. You're kind of sweaty afterwards and you have a big screen in your face, and I'd rather just kind of relax. If I am playing a game, I'd rather play it on a normal screen while relaxing, so I'm not too so I could basically sleep after it, because playing in VR and coming out, you're sweaty, your forehead is kind of warm and you kind of have a bit of a headache. It's just not great. It's pretty hard to find the game. The game is pretty fun. It's actually really fun, but the player base, it just isn't there. Another sports game is Sea Smash VR, and this game falls into the walkabout mini golf or Beat Saber category, where it's a lot of fun, but it's something I dip into over time rather than binging. So imagine you're playing a squash brick breaker, and that's basically what this game is. You're essentially in a rectangle room, a ball spawns in the middle, and you have to smack it with a racket to break the targets at the other end of the room. The game is a great, easy to play but hard to master game that I think is just brilliant for PSVR 2. Just like Beat Saber or other games like this. You can choose between two modes, one that lets you fail and retry levels, whereas the other is super hardcore, and if you fail a level, you have to then go back to the start. And this is a great spot for these games. I used this as a casual experience, and I wasn't really chasing high scores, and even at that, I was having a great time. But in the levels, you have ranking where you must beat them in a certain time, and there's where you can get really good, learn how to play properly, and aim for high scores. And I never felt like I was missing out not going for high scores, but it's just great that you have both options. The game is fun, and I would recommend it to anybody that's looking for an arcadey experience on PSVR 2, because just like a lot of games on this list, it's one of them games that's just great to dip in for one round here or there, and you just have some fun. And I have two more games before we get into the most disappointing game, but the third and second last games I'm going to talk about are two narrative-based games. One felt a bit lackluster, and the other one I didn't really enjoy and also had a lot of water, which scared me, so I never beat it. Huus is a sci-fi narrative shooter, and right off the bat, this game is genuinely gorgeous. It's one of the best looking games I've played on PSVR 2. It's pretty narrative heavy, so basically you crash land on an alien planet and you have to figure out how to get off it. And the first time I emerged from my ship, I was blown away, but I saw how much water was on the planet, and if you've ever watched my Subnautica video, you realise that I don't like water, and I absolutely despise water when it's in VR, because everything in VR is a horror game. You're playing the cutest game in the world, but somehow, if you're underwater in VR, it's terrifying. The first thing you have to do is explore this underwater section, killing these alien squid to collect their tentacles. And even though this isn't trying to be scary and it's bright, I was struggling to go much further. Later on, there was more water that is slightly deeper and darker, but I persevered. Now, I didn't beat this game, and it's for a couple of reasons. One, it didn't really grip me. The narrative, there wasn't really much intrigue. You crash landed on an alien planet and you have to figure out what's going on. You know, it's pretty basic stuff. But you have this robot following you around that's voiced by, I assume, an Australian woman, and the voice acting isn't good. It sounds extremely, I don't know if it's from the voice actor or the direction. It just sounds completely, the voice actor sounds completely uninterested in every single line that she delivers. So anytime there was a bit of narrative, I was like, I just can't take this seriously.
The dematerializer is on the right. It converts objects into resource tubes. Okay, grab some objects and throw them in the dematerializer.
And on top of that, the point where I gave up is that basically you're in a ship, you have to climb down a ladder into this dark place where there's a load of water that you have to swim under. And because the game wasn't gripping me, like, I can understand I am a baby when it comes to even any semblance of horror. But if a game is really that good, I will persevere, just like, say, Resident Evil 7 or Resident Evil 8 or Resident Evil 2 Remake. Them games, or Dead Space Remake, the list goes on. Them games are just so good that I can deal with the horror. But this game has a lot of jank to it. As I said, the narrative wasn't gripping me, the voice acting wasn't great. The guns felt just okay, and there's quite a bit of climbing in this game, and it's quite janky. It kind of made me appreciate Horizon Call of the Mountain a lot more. Because yes, there is always going to be a certain amount of jank to kind of having free-flowing hands, but climbing in Horizon Call of the Mountain was pretty bug-free, and it actually felt really good. It was rare that your hands would glitch, or it's rare that you tried to grab onto something and you wouldn't. But here in Hubris, with the small amount of climbing I did, I'm not like super deep into VR where I can explain certain things really well and why it isn't working, but it was just a feeling. When you play Horizon Call of the Mountain and you are climbing up a wall, you can seriously feel how polished that game is. But after playing, no joke, 5 or 10 minutes of Hubris climbing, you will realize what I mean. It's just not quite there. And my final point about Hubris is that back in the day on PSVR1, and back then there was a certain level of just okayness to VR games that I could accept. Because as a way to play games, VR was new, so, you know, developers needed time to figure certain things out. So even the most average games like Farpoint felt cool because I was like, oh my god, I'm playing a first-person shooter in VR. But now that kind of magic has washed off, and you play other certain higher quality shooters like, say, Synapse or something, and you just realize that, you know, it's just, this game, I just wouldn't recommend it. I didn't like what I played of it. And also, water, no, I will not swim underwater in VR, it's too scary. Now, Pixel Rip 1978 is actually a pretty cool game that has some good ideas, and this is one that I didn't finish because basically, now, it was completely on me. I missed something during the review period, and I was including it in this, and eventually, look, I'm gonna be honest, I have too many games to play, and it just fell to the wayside. But I will tell you what I felt about Pixel Rip 1978. So basically, this game kind of has 3 prongs. There's one where you're in the Atari office programming games, and this has kind of 2 prongs within it. There's kind of the office simulator, think something like Job Simulator, where you're doing menial office tasks and your desk mate is walking around and chatting to you. But also you are bug testing and fixing games, and you are playing on an Atari, but you are in the office, so you pick up the controller and you're controlling the character on the screen. And when you're controlling the character on the screen, that is a 2D side-scrolling platformer, and it's a pretty cool idea. The second prong of this game is when you go to sort of like your childhood. So in the game, you are a programmer from Atari, and you go back in time to when you were playing like your first Atari as a kid. And these are set up similar to The Office, where you are actually in the space. So a really cool thing about this game is when you go back in time, you're sitting in your sitting room and you're playing your Atari and you're playing like a brick breaker. But the whole thing about this game is that there is this glitch in a game that infected it. But when you go back in time, the glitch infects everything and takes things out of the screen. So you're playing a brick breaker on your like big TV in your living room or sitting room. I don't know why I called it a living room. I'm not American. But then the glitch, the goblin, brings the game out into your room, and then you're actually playing the brick breaker in the room, and it's incorporating things in the room. I know I said in the room a lot, but there's incorporating things to kind of, yeah, you're playing the brick breaker, but to break down a shield, you have to pick up a ball of paper beside you and throw it at him, and then continue to play the brick breaker. And when you get them moments, I was like, oh shit, this is cool. Like, they are genuinely bring a smile to my face moments. They are seriously just magical, and I think it's something that only VR can do. But the third prong of this game is the one that takes up the most time from what I've played. Now, I got about 50% through the game, but it's also the worst. So the kind of real VR part of this is you get sucked into the game that you are playing, and it becomes a pixelated world, a 3D kind of first-person shooter almost, but it just isn't very fun. Once the novelty wears off of you are in like a JRPG town interacting with like different NPCs, and different NPCs are from different eras, which is really cool. You have like flat people, you have 3D people. It is like, it has a bit of charm to it, but once you're like doing the actual, you're exploring the world, you're just walking around shooting enemies that don't pose any threat to you whatsoever. But it does do something cool where it like melds it all into one. So you go into the game that your character is playing in the game, like the 2D game. But there are parts where you get to in the 2D game where you can't progress because your character needs an upgrade or vice versa. And you can then go from the 2D to the 3D game to bypass certain things to get that upgrade. So then you can go back into the 2D game to progress further, and then later down the line you have to switch it around. And the game does have some cool ideas, but ultimately I think it was that actual in the VR part that, you know, kind of stopped me from playing it. I think this is a wait for a sale kind of game. And then finally, and I do have a full video on this if you want to watch it, because this game is an absolute disappointment. It's Firewall Ultra. This was going to be the game that I was hoping I could sit down. I said this at the start of my video, like, oh my god, this is such a great PSVR2 game, you have to play it. But it just isn't the case. I won't go into it too deep here because I do have a full video, but basically, the progression is awful. I played something like 50 games and I was level 2, and I was like a fifth of the way to unlocking a new gun. The progression is awful. But on top of that, and I will do an update video at some point in the future, the matchmaking is kind of broken where you'd be waiting on lobbies for hours and people would join in, then they'd leave, and there'd be 5 people on the other team somehow in their lobby and 3 people over here. But it wouldn't change, and they have rolled out some fixes, so I will go back to it in the future when they kind of fix it. You know, there's quite a few issues with the game right now. Not only from sort of like a technical standpoint, there's plenty of glitches, plenty of visual bugs, the menus kind of clip into things, but also on a fundamental kind of design level, this game isn't interactive. And I know the first Firewall wasn't, but I think I was expecting a bit more going into this. Basically, there's a lot of things in this game where you would like to think that you can do it, but you can't. There's certain railings that you try to shoot through, and your bullets should go through them, but they don't. You can't interact with anything in the world. When you open a door, you just have to press R1. You don't like actually creep open and open it. Like, just interacting with things is all done by a button. There's no real, like, you can't pick up a gun and throw it and interact with it in that way. Like this game is more immersive than something like Call of Duty, because obviously you're in the VR headset and you're actually holding the gun, but it's nowhere near as immersive as other shooters where you can kind of interact with things. Now, before I get on to actually talking about the good parts of the game, I think they brought in 1 or 2 new maps. So if you are new to Firewall, you never had a PSVR 1, then this won't be an issue. But there's like 8 or something maps in the game, and I think 1 or 2 of them are brand new, and the rest are all Firewall 0 hour maps, which is just like, I'm all for bringing back old maps, because I mean, why not include them? But like, at the very least, if you're gonna have 8 maps, you know, use 4 new and 4 old, or, you know, don't use 6 new and 2, or 6 old and 2 new. That's just a bit ridiculous. Now, the good parts about this game is that I was afraid that without the VR aim controller that was on the PSVR 1, you would kind of do that stupid thing, you know, where you kind of struggle to level the gun so you can find your iron sights or your scope, because that does happen quite a lot in VR games. But here they have this cool ability, or cool function, where it's R2 for me, but it'll be L2 for you because I'm left-handed. But you press L2 or R2 and it snaps the aim direct to center of your screen. And 90-ish% of the time this works really well, and it's just a brilliant implementation. About 10% of the time, you know, it kind of doesn't work, but I hope that's something that, with a bit of polish, it can be fixed, like, going down the line. And the best part about this game is that it does still have those moments that 0 Hour had, where you're creeping around the corner. The lighting in this game is fantastic. I have to give them props for that. It really is truly amazing. Where you're creeping around the corner and you have to turn on your torch because the map is absolutely pitch black, and you're opening the door and you're peeking, you see an enemy and you pop behind, you like throw a flashbang out the door and you rush over, all while one of your teammates are communicating in your ear. And that's when Firewall is amazing. And it does have them moments, voice crack aside, but to get to them moments, you have to get through a lot of crap. I do think in the future, a lot of these issues can be fixed, and the game could be turned into something that is definitely worth buying. But right now, this is just an avoid. There's just too many issues with it, and the new content just isn't there. So I would avoid this game right now. Keep checking back on my channel, because I will do an update, you know, after they've done a good couple of patches, maybe a month or 2 down the line, to see how it's all panned out, if the game is actually working. But yeah, there is still a good couple of VR games coming out till the end of the year. We have Hellsweeper VR, we have TOS, which is out in a couple of days. There's still Bulletstorm VR. There's probably a couple that I'm missing. So I might do another one of these come the end of the year. But right now, there's a whole load of other VR games. A lot of them I do recommend. There's still a lot of good games on PSVR2 if you are willing to kind of, you know, pick through the shit, because there is quite a bit of crap on it too. So yeah, I really appreciate you watching and listening to me ramble about PSVR2. Let me know what your favorite game is down in the comments down below. Your kind of favorite hidden gem game. I don't want, Horizon or, one of the bigger games. Just give me something like a kind of offshoot recommendation that for PSVR2 that you would recommend I go check out that I haven't mentioned in my past 2 videos. So appreciate you watching. Subscribe, Discord, blah, blah, blah. Goodbye.